Some people claim that the New Testament was written in Aramaic, but most of us, if we check to see what the original translation of the New Testament was, we find that it's in Greek. So why do people think it's Aramaic? They say that it's Aramaic, a lot of them, because there are certain expressions in the New Testament that in the Gospels that sound like they are from a Hebrew mindset, or a Hebrew or an Aramaic way of thinking. And I want to talk about why this is, and also because we know a lot of us are familiar with some of the expressions that we've seen in the New Testament. I'll give you a few here now. In Matthew 27, in verse 45 through 47, we know when Yeshua was on the cross, he said, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, and it says, and that is, and then it gives the translation of it, my God, why have you forsaken me? And there's different controversy on what the actual translation of, but that's not what I want to talk about here today. And then there's another, I'm just going to give a few here. In Mark chapter 5, verse 41, Yeshua says to the girl who they thought was dead, she says, Talitha kumi, or Talitha kum. And then it says, which is translated, little girl, I say to you, arise. And then a few others that you can look up are in Mark chapter 7, verse 34, and in Matthew chapter 5, in 22, when he says you should not even call anybody stupid or dumb, and he gives the actual word raka, which we know is not English, and then it has to give the translation of it, which means to be empty-headed or stupid or a numbskull or something like that. So, and also you might read a book or see some articles about how they'll talk about in the Gospels where it says, there's different expressions where it says, if the eye is whole, then the whole body is whole. And there are some other expressions like that where when you read them, you say, what is he talking about? And so obviously this is some type of influence from Hebrew, some type of expression in Hebrew. And that happens in every language. I speak a few different languages, so I know this. There are expressions that we have in English that if you were to translate them literally into another language, they would make no sense to another person. And yet, to us, they make perfect sense. Even think of the expression when you say, for good. I stopped eating chocolate for good. Now, we all know what that means. It means permanently, forever. I'm not going back to eating chocolate or something like that. But when you actually think of the words, because I teach English as a second language to Latino students, and when they hear that one, they literally think about the words for and good, and it makes no sense to them that for good, it sounds like it's something that's for somebody's good. Why would that mean permanently? You see, and these are just expressions in our language. Okay, so getting back to the main point here, these arguments might sound convincing that the New Testament was written in Aramaic, or some even say in Hebrew, because you see that these expressions are typically Hebrew expressions. But I want to talk about why I don't think that I think the New Testament that we have in Greek was written in Greek. Now, definitely, all of the writers and all of the main people that are talked about in the New Testament spoke Aramaic and Hebrew, or definitely at least Aramaic. Aramaic is like a very close dialect of Hebrew. I think Aramaic and Hebrew speakers could understand each other. They were that close. They were kind of like the way Portuguese and Spanish are, that Portuguese and Spanish speakers could pretty much have a conversation with each other. I know this firsthand because I learned Spanish as a second language. I speak it fluently, and I can pretty much have a conversation with someone if they're speaking to me in Portuguese. I don't understand 100% of what they're saying, so I don't know if Aramaic and Hebrew are even closer than that or less closer. But I want to go over why this theory is not true. So like I said, first I want to just let you know that I do know what I'm talking about to a certain extent as far as language goes. Like I said, I learned Spanish as a second language. I speak it fluently. I speak it very, very well. I'm a translator and an interpreter. And it's not to toot my own horn. I just want to prove a point here. I speak it well enough that a lot of native speakers, at first, they're not sure that I'm American, especially if we're talking over the phone. And I have to convince them. I say, yes, I'm definitely American, but I have a pretty good accent and a good control of the language. Nevertheless, and many of my friends and people I talk to, they say, you speak it perfectly, you speak Spanish great, you speak it excellent. And I know that that's not 100% true. But regardless of that, I know that given enough time, and if I'm writing or speaking, my English thoughts, my English way of thinking comes through a little bit. Hopefully not too much. I try to speak Spanish as well as I can. But no matter, unless you are bilingual, like from birth or from a very young age, which I'm not. I started to study Spanish when I was about 15 years old, so that's pretty late. And regardless, I speak it fluently, and yet, no matter, if you give me enough time and I'm speaking long enough in Spanish, some of my English thoughts are going to come through. And I can feel it even. I can just sense at certain times that I'm trying to express something, and the way I'm expressing it isn't exactly the way I've heard Latinos or Spanish speakers express similar ideas. And so, if you were to read something that I wrote in Spanish, and I can write in Spanish fluently, you would say, all right, this is written in Spanish, and yet you would see like some of the expressions, given enough time, you would see some of the expressions and the ways of thinking that would come through would be English thoughts and English ways of thinking, maybe even American ways of thinking, because I'm American and that's my culture. And so that's why I believe that even though these writers of the New Testament books were writing in Greek, or having somebody with them writing it in Greek for them, they couldn't help for some of their Hebrew thoughts and their Hebrew expressions to like bleed through or to just come through into the Greek language. And then now to us, from Greek to English, when we read it. I don't think it was because it was written in Hebrew or in Greek. And the main reason I don't believe that is because so many times I read, it says these words in Aramaic, where it says, when Yeshua was on the cross, Yeshua of Nazareth was on the cross, he says, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, and then he translates it, and that means, my God, why have you forsaken me, or whatever the translation of it is. If it were originally, see, I'm a translator, so I know that doesn't make sense to say that was written in Aramaic. It makes much more sense that it was written in Greek. Because if it were written in Aramaic and then translated from Aramaic into English, or from Aramaic into Greek and then into English, it wouldn't say, he said, Eli, Eli. They wouldn't put it they wouldn't mention the Aramaic words. They would just say, he was on the cross and he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why would you mention the Aramaic words? Again, I'm a translator, because I know if I were doing a translation, I wouldn't write that. That's why when I heard this theory about it written in Aramaic, I thought that's absurd. No, it's in Greek, but the Greek writers, because they're writing in Greek, for some reason they wanted to emphasize at that point that he said it like this in Aramaic. Like, for example, if I were writing a book in English, and I was in Latin America when I was writing it, and the whole book is in English, but then I said, and then Carlos said in Spanish, and then I say the words, ven acá por favor. And that is, in English, come here please. That would make sense, because I'm speaking English, and I'm telling you what he said in Spanish, the person in Spanish. And that's what happened there. They wrote the New Testament in Greek, but for some reason they wanted to bring across the actual words that Yeshua or Paul the Apostle said at that point in Aramaic or Hebrew, and that's why they said it. Not because if the book were originally written in Aramaic, it wouldn't be necessary to say that. So it would be like, imagine if I'm writing a book, again I'll use the same example, in English, but now I'm in the United States. And then I said, and the main character in this story's name is Robert. So I say, and then Robert said in English, "Hey, what are you doing?" That would make no sense. If the whole book is in English, why would I then say Robert said in English? It makes no sense. It would only make sense if someone were writing a book in Spanish about something that happened in the United States, and then he wanted to quote somebody, and he didn't want to just translate it directly into Spanish. He wanted you to know what the actual words of this American guy named Robert was, and so then he translated, he says them in English, and then he translates them into Spanish. So that's the main point. And you can look up, and as you're reading the New Testament, you'll notice all the times where it says, and that is translated, and it is, and that is, they say it in Hebrew, in Aramaic, and then it says, and that is, and then it's translated into, for us, to English, but in the original, it was in Greek. Remember, Greek at that time was the lingua franca. It was the universal language. It was what English is today. Everybody was still speaking Greek because of the conquering of the Alexander the Great and the Greeks all over that area. Now, granted, the superpower was Rome, and that's why they still had to do things in Latin too. But Latin didn't catch on as a business language or a lingua franca, an international language. Greek was still that language, and so everyone needed to know Greek to some extent or another. Now, that doesn't mean everyone knew it, just like today everyone doesn't know English, but a lot of people do. And because I am an English teacher, I know that not everyone knows English. Foreigners don't all learn English and get to the same level of fluency. Some only learn how to use it a little bit, and some become very fluent. And so the same thing happened back then, I'm sure, that some people were very good with Greek, depending on what their travels were, and some knew it somewhat, more or less. Some only knew a little bit, and that's why we have these different levels of translation into Greek. Again, they were Hebrew and Aramaic speakers, all the apostles and all the people that we see in the New Testament, but except for some of the people who were from Asia Minor, what is modern-day Turkey and Greece, I'm sure some of them didn't necessarily speak Aramaic, and they probably only spoke Greek. And maybe some of them helped with the translation. But they wanted to get this important message, this good news, out to the world, and so they translated it into the most common language at that time, which was Greek. Like someone would do today, they would translate it into English, not into a less used language like Aramaic or Hebrew. So I just wanted to bring those points across. But the main point of this video is just because somebody quotes some Hebrew words or some Aramaic words to show you that they know something about the original language of the Bible, and they want to look like some type of expert, I just want you to realize that anybody can quote a few words out of their concordance, or can be taking a Hebrew class once a week or something, and they're not necessarily an expert in it, especially since even if somebody completely fluently spoke Hebrew, modern Hebrew is not the same as the Hebrew that was spoken 2,000 years ago. If you just study English, how much it's changed in the last 500 years. It's only 500 years. If you were to try to speak with someone who spoke English at the time of Shakespeare, you'd have a hard time. You'd probably be able to understand some of what they were saying, but you'd have a hard time. And if you were to go back about 800 or 900 years, you couldn't even understand English. As Middle to Old English was practically like German. It was so different from what modern English is. So to think, now I know that Hebrew is a little bit different because it's been maintained, the writing, but the actual native speakers of it have, even in modern Israel right now, where you have something like 6 million people, only half of those people, about 3 million of them, are real native speakers of Hebrew. The other half have learned it, they speak it fluently, but they speak it as a second language. A lot of them spoke Yiddish and other languages, and Russian, and you name it, so many other languages. So modern Hebrew is not what ancient Hebrew was. So how can anybody be an expert on it? So I just want you to bring caution. Not that this is so important that whether the New Testament was written in Hebrew or Aramaic or Greek, it doesn't really affect us. The most important thing is that we have Bibles that we can study and study the Scriptures from Genesis to Revelation. But I just want you to stay alert because there is so much deception coming, and it can just creep in and start in small ways. So be alert. All of Scripture is good for us. Don't let anybody tell you that any of the books of the Bible can be eliminated and can be taken out like the book of Hebrews, or there are some people that think you should only read the book of Matthew, John, and Revelation, and everything else should be thrown out. Those people, very soon after they start believing that, are convinced to believe that Yeshua, the Messiah from Nazareth, isn't the Messiah anymore, and they go into Judaism or something like that. So just be alert. Don't be fooled. Ask the Father for wisdom and for understanding and to protect you.